Story 1. The Babylonian Sundial, measuring time in the dusty courtyards of Uruk. In the dry, sun-baked plains of ancient Mesopotamia, where the land stretches wide and flat under the pressing weight of the sky, a man squats beside a stick in the sand. The year is roughly 1500 BCE, give or take a few dusty decades, and time as we know it is still being figured out. But for the scribes and priests of Babylon, measuring time is already becoming more than a curiosity. It is becoming a necessity. You are there, standing in the dusty courtyard of a modest temple annex in the city of Uruk, where everything from offerings to official meetings must happen on time. But what does on time mean when no clocks tick, no bells toll, and the only tools at your disposal are the sky, the sun, and whatever you can scavenge from the earth? Here, the answer is the gnomon, a fancy name for a simple stick poked upright into the ground. The length and angle of its shadow shift predictably throughout the day. And from this humble observation grows the first rudimentary timekeeping. The first clocks were shadows. The Babylonians didn't invent the sundial, not officially, but they refined it, calculated with it, and began writing down what it told them. They were observer scribes with clay tablets and styluses, not to document high drama or thrilling conquests, but to track which shadow appeared where and when. The sundial wasn't always an elegant stone disc. More often than not, it was a flat surface, dirt, clay, sometimes a baked brick with lines etched out from the center like rays. At the center stood the gnomon, a stick or post. The day began when the shadow fell just so, and then the priest would announce that morning duties could commence. Each segment of the day had its own name, but the hours 12 by daylight, 12 by night were uneven. Summer hours were longer, winter ones shorter. Everything hinged on the sun, and so every day the time shifted just a little bit. It was both precise and relative, frustrating and oddly graceful. You can imagine the scribe watching the shadow stretch thin across his tablet, waiting patiently to mark the change. He's been doing this for years. His tunic is dusty, his feet bare, his beard neatly braided. He has a calendar in his head and a lifetime's worth of sunrises memorized. His job is not glamorous, but it is trusted. Without him, the temple ceremonies would fall into disarray. And perhaps worse, someone might eat the sacrificial goat before the proper time. When time became a tool of power. Time in Babylon wasn't democratic. It belonged to temples and palaces. You couldn't check it from your kitchen, you had to wait for the priest to announce it. Sundials were sacred instruments in a way. To manipulate time meant to control access to rituals, labor shifts, even public announcements. If the priest said it was time to harvest, you harvested. If he said it was noon, you stopped working and ate. That's why the man with the stick in the courtyard holds more power than you'd think. He doesn't speak loudly. He doesn't need to. His quiet observation governs others, not because he is cruel, but because someone has to tell everyone else what to do, and time has to move in one direction. But his is not a life of ease. The sun is not always cooperative. Sometimes clouds move in from the west. Sometimes dusk clings to the horizon, dulling the light. On such days he must rely on memory, on the habitual timing of birdsong or the pattern of shadows against walls. On very bad days he simply guesses carefully, based on years of study. The temple timetable. Behind him, inside the annex, the temple staff prepare offerings. Bread, dates, fish, and on special days goat. Timing is everything. The meat must not be burned too soon or the gods might be offended. It must not be delayed or the omen might sour. The calendar is aligned with the heavens and the schedule with the sundial. You watch as he gently brushes sand away from a marker stone. It's one of several embedded into the courtyard, each marking the average position of the shadow at key times of the year. These stones were placed long ago, perhaps by his teacher, perhaps by his teacher's teacher. They don't move. They are a kind of time fossil. At his waist, a pouch of reeds and soft clay tablets. Every day he makes a new mark, nothing dramatic, just a dot, a line, a number scratched in cuneiform. But these dots accumulate, and over decades they form tables, and the tables form patterns, and the patterns begin to predict. A kind of forecasting. By the time of the Neo-Babylonian period, around the 6th century BCE, the scribes had developed astonishingly accurate shadow charts. They could predict eclipses, solstices, even rainfall cycles just from tracking shadows and recording them, year after year. Their system of base 60 mathematics helped them divide the day more evenly, more logically, into what we now call hours and minutes. But here in Uruk, centuries earlier, the system is still forming. The scribe does not know he is contributing to the legacy of global timekeeping. He only knows that the shadow is late today, and it will probably delay the barley procession. He'll have to inform the priest. He scratches a brief note onto the wet clay, shadow long at third line. That will be enough. Then he lifts the gnomon to check its base. A little crooked. He adjusts it gently and resets the line in the sand. He does not know, of course, that millennia later, people will build entire cities around mechanical clocks, that skyscrapers will rise and trains will run to the second, that satellites will blink in orbit, measuring time in atomic vibrations. But he would probably not be impressed. To him, it is still about sunlight. It is always about the sun. What does it mean to tell time? As the sun reaches its peak, the shadow shrinks to nearly nothing. This is the sacred center of the day, when the gods are said to gaze most directly upon the earth. It is hot, dry, quiet. A few flies drift lazily in the warmth. The scribe closes his eyes briefly, enjoying the silence. You stand beside him, watching that shrinking shadow. It is somehow mesmerizing. Time passes not with clicks but with slow, crawling movement. You feel it in your bones. This is how humans used to live, slowly, with shadows. And as the shadow begins to lengthen again, you might wonder, what did the Babylonians do when the sun disappeared for days at a time? The shadow was the measure of order. When it behaved, the days were simple, predictable, and quietly productive. But in the plains of Mesopotamia, the sun did not always comply. It disappeared behind dust storms, clouds, or unexpected weather rolling in from the distant Zagros mountains. And in those moments, when the sky turned gray and the gnomon's shadow dissolved into nothingness, the people of Uruk found themselves adrift in a world where time was suddenly uncertain. You are still there in that same courtyard. The one sharp lines scratched into clay are barely visible beneath the shifting dust. The air smells dry and metallic, and though it is day, the sky is strangely dim. The scribe sits cross-legged, peering upward with the wary expression of someone who relies on the heavens for a living. This is not uncommon, but it is inconvenient. There is work to be done inside the temple, sacrifices to burn, taxes to count, and yet without the shadow no one is entirely sure when these things should happen. So, instead, they wait. Cloudy days and clay tables. On days like these, the scribes turn to something far more boring than shadows: records. Stacks and stacks of small clay tablets, each inscribed with notes from prior years. Observations of the sun's position on this day last year and the year before that. They would compare data, measuring how long the sun usually stayed hidden during the season known as Abu, midsummer, or whether this was typical for the Kislevu moon. From this slowly accumulated body of notes, a kind of backup calendar had emerged. These weren't grand, cosmic revelations. They were local observations, sun obscured by cloud in second hour, or smoke from river reeds caused delayed shadow. Each note was a breadcrumb left for future scribes. The records were stored in niches in the temple wall, wrapped in cloth or papyrus, though sometimes the tablets themselves were just left in baskets clumped together like forgotten receipts. One by one, the scribe would sift through them, brushing off clay dust, looking for a precedent that could guide today's schedule. This isn't glamour. This is administration. The heartbeat of an empire is sometimes nothing more than waiting for the clouds to clear. Time and ritual, sacred and tedious. In the ziggurat's shadow, religious timing was sacred. Offerings had to be burned at the exact moment the sun reached a specific point. But when that moment couldn't be seen, priests would defer to the scribes. Their best guess was treated as holy. In other cultures, this might seem like guesswork, but in Uruk, precision came from boredom. Decades, centuries of dry, repetitive note-taking created an invisible system of trust. The temple functioned not because of divine miracles, but because 100 generations of scribes knew how the sun behaved in late summer when the river was low. And so, even today, with no visible shadow, the scribe reaches a quiet conclusion. He leans forward, gently carves a horizontal mark on a new tablet and announces, "It is the 4th hour." And that is enough. Inside the temple, acolytes begin to move. Fires are lit. Dried fish are arranged on plates. Incense is placed into small bronze bowls. This was not guesswork, it was memory in motion. What about night? But of course, the sundial could not help at night. So how did they track time after sunset? You walk with the scribe down a dusty corridor toward the eastern edge of the city. There, where the fields meet the starlit plains, stands another strange timekeeper, not a stick in the ground, but a bowl. This was the water clock, or clepsydra, a large ceramic vessel, filled with water carefully punctured so that it dripped at a regular pace into a smaller vessel below. The rate of flow was known. Marks on the inside of the bowl indicated the passage of time. It was crude, imperfect, but dependable enough, particularly for timing night watches, or for astronomical purposes when the priests studied the stars. One could not look at a sundial during a lunar eclipse, but a water clock could measure how long the moon stayed hidden. Some clepsydras were large, others portable. They made a faint dripping noise through the night, barely audible, but always there. Imagine falling asleep with that steady dripping in the background. It was their version of a ticking clock. It wasn't beautiful, but it worked. When time becomes a philosophy. By this point in Babylonian culture, time was not only a tool, it was becoming something more abstract, a cycle, a force, even a divine principle. The movement of stars and planets were believed to affect kings, weather, and fortune. Time was not simply the hours of the day, it was a framework for prophecy. This belief birthed the Babylonian interest in astrology, which we still reference today. Horoscopes, zodiac signs, planetary influences, all of it began here, with a people who watched the sky obsessively because they needed to tell time, and ended up seeing meaning in the patterns. You watch as the scribe kneels beside the water clock, adjusting the flow slightly. The moon has risen a hazy crescent behind thin clouds. Tomorrow, they expect another sunless morning, another difficult day of guessing. And yet he does not seem concerned. His tablet is filled with notes. The stars are where they ought to be. He's confident that time is still moving forward, even if it's hidden from view. Tomorrow, he will visit the priest again, and they'll determine the best hour for lighting the sacred fire. But for now, the courtyard is silent. The water clock continues its slow drip, and in the stillness, a thought lingers. How did these ancient people come to divide time so precisely without ever seeing a clock? The sun rises again slowly, cautiously over the brick and reed rooftops of Uruk. The sky is clear this time, as if apologizing for yesterday's uncertainty. The shadow of the gnomon is long, stretching like a ribbon across the courtyard. The scribe, older now than he once was, stands beside it with the calm patience of a man who knows that time will always return, even if it briefly hides. You join him once more in the courtyard, the dust warmed by sunlight, the lines on the ground redrawn with careful precision. The stick is still there, though now mounted in a shallow bronze base to keep it from tilting. Around it, not just scratched markings, but a full layout rays that divide the space into 12 segments, a sundial in its most familiar form. It has taken years to reach this point. Years of recording, adjusting, correcting, arguing, and debating. Time, Once just a vague impression, a sense that morning was different from evening has now become measurable, divisible, and deeply embedded in daily life. The invention of the hour. One of the most significant contributions the Babylonians made to world history was the sexagesimal system, a base 60 numerical method, that still affects how we tell time today. 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds in a minute, it all goes back to these early thinkers. But why 60? There are many theories. One is that 60 is highly divisible. It has 12 divisors, including 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. That made it practical for dividing the day into meaningful parts. Others point to earlier Sumerian traditions, or even the influence of finger-counting systems where one could count to 60 using the joints of the fingers. Regardless of its origin, the result was extraordinary, a method of dividing the day into consistent units, which allowed for more than just sundials. It allowed for calendars, shift work, even interest rates on loans. Here in Uruk, the practical outcome is simple but powerful. The day is no longer one long, melting block of light. It is now a sequence: morning prayer, grain delivery, midday rest, temple duties, evening offerings. The shadow, once just a wandering blur, now hits specific points at specific times. Time has become a grid, the city that ran on rhythm. Uruk, by this point, is more than a dusty city. It is a machine humming with quiet, agricultural efficiency. Merchants move their wares when the third shadow line is reached. Temple kitchens begin to cook when the fourth hour nears. Children are dismissed from scribal school when the sun touches a particular mark on the wall. You can walk through the streets and feel the rhythm. Not mechanical, not yet, but deeply human. Built on the repetition of days, the memory of seasons, and the chalky shadows cast on baked earth. Even social order ties into timekeeping. Laborers are assigned hours of service based on the sun. Contracts include phrases like, "until the shadow moves 3 fingers," or "for 5 divisions of the sun." These aren't metaphors, they are measurements. The same shadow that tells the temple when to burn incense also tells a farmer when to stop digging. And interestingly, the same observations that govern the sun's behavior during the day began to influence celestial calendars at night. From hours to eternity, time as legacy. As astronomy developed, so did a deeper awareness of cycles. Not just days, but years, eclipses, and even planetary movements. Babylonian scholars became early astronomers, able to predict lunar eclipses using mathematical models derived from watching shadows and stars. This connection between daily timekeeping and celestial timekeeping created a philosophical bridge. If the same principles could be used to track a shadow and to predict the return of Venus, then perhaps time itself was a grand cycle, divine, eternal, and ultimately knowable. It is here that the humble sundial steps into history not just as a tool, but as a symbol. The gnomon becomes more than a stick. It becomes a pointer to the heavens, a quiet reminder that the same sun which lights the courtyard also governs the stars. The same cycles that move the priest's offering also move the fate of kings. The scribe's final record. As the day continues, the scribe adds a final mark to today's tablet. The lines are firm, deliberate. Shadow touched 6th marker at midday. Nothing dramatic, just a note. But it will be stored with the others, joining thousands of similar lines carved into clay. And then, with a long exhale, the scribe presses his seal into the corner of the tablet, a small cylinder with his family mark. He has done this thousands of times, and yet he does it carefully. This tablet will be kept, perhaps in the temple archive, perhaps buried in a jar, lost until some archaeologist rediscovers it 3,000 years later. But to the scribe, this is simply the next page in a very long book. He leans back and closes his eyes. The gnomon's shadow slowly drifts across the 7th marker. Time continues. You leave the courtyard, stepping away from the etched lines and baked bricks. but the image stays with you: the sun, the stick, the ever-moving shadow. The Babylonians didn't invent clocks as we know them, but they did something perhaps more impressive. They created order out of sunlight. They observed, recorded, adjusted, and trusted that the sky would tell them what they needed to know. They made time something you could see. And though their cities have fallen and their language faded, we still live by their shadow marks. We still divide our hours as they once did. We still chase the sun. And so you might ask yourself, if time was once only a shadow in the sand, what might we be missing now by not looking up? Story 2. Dinner before sunset. Mealtime customs in ancient Egypt's Middle Kingdom. The Nile is calm, its muddy banks whispering beneath reeds and wild papyrus. The sun hangs low in the western sky, casting long golden shadows over the flat-roofed houses of a Middle Kingdom village somewhere near Thebes, sometime around 1900 BCE. It is dinner time, or rather, it soon will be, because in ancient Egypt, timing your meal wasn't just about hunger, it was about harmony. You are standing just outside a modest home made of mud brick, its courtyard swept, its walls faded from years of sun. The household is neither rich nor poor. The man of the house is a scribe, a middle-tier bureaucrat employed by the regional granary office. He has a name, but it doesn't matter much. What matters is his dinner because, like every other civil servant in Egypt, his day has been structured around the rhythms of light, labor, and food. The sun must set before the main meal begins. That is the rule, not written, but understood. The timing of meals in ancient Egypt followed the sun and the seasons, not mechanical clocks. There were typically two major meals in the day for most Egyptians: a light morning offering, more a snack than a feast, and a larger, more social evening meal, the one you're now waiting for. The ingredients of a boring Egyptian dinner. The scribe's wife, an efficient woman with strong hands and a linen headwrap, prepares the evening meal in a small outdoor kitchen shaded with woven reeds. There's no fire yet. That won't be lit until the shadow of the date palm touches the second courtyard wall, signaling that the day's obligations are finished. The food is simple, repetitive, and nourishing. Bread, of course, always bread. Made from emmer wheat and often coarsely ground, it is thick and flat, sometimes baked with onions or leeks. Gritty with bits of sand and husk, it wears down the teeth over years of chewing, but it fills the belly. Next, beer. This is not the clear amber brew of modern fantasy, but a chunky, porridge-like mixture made from fermented bread. It's sweet, thick, and consumed from tall jars through a straw often flavored with herbs or date syrup. It is not a luxury. Even small children drink it. To go with the bread and beer, a bit of onion, a strip of dried fish, some beans mashed with garlic, and if it's a special day, a single quail egg. Everything is placed on earthenware bowls and simple platters. No silver, no feasts. This is ordinary life. And yet to the Egyptian, this meal is sacred. Food, status, and the afterlife. Meals in ancient Egypt were not just for the living. Tombs were stocked with clay models of loaves, beer jugs, and roasted ducks. Wall paintings showed banquets not as parties but as sustenance for eternity. If you ate well in life, you hope to eat well forever. Our scribe has even written food inventories for burial chambers, lists of onions, bread loaves, and fish, carefully counted and placed for future use in the afterlife. He does not find this strange. For him, meals are both nourishment and continuity, a practice that connects the living to the dead. But for now, he is just hungry. He steps into the courtyard, loosens his stiff linen tunic, and stretches. The sun is almost down. The shadow is long enough. His wife lights the cooking fire using a handful of dried palm fronds and cow dung fuel. A small black pot is placed over the flame. Lentils, softened from soaking all day, begin to bubble. The children gather, two boys, barefoot and curious. They carry small clay toys and sit on the low wall, waiting. Their mother swats at flies. The father prepares the sitting mats, brushing off dust. There is no table, Food will be placed on a cloth and everyone will sit around it. No chairs, no knives. You break bread with your hands, dip it into sauces or stews, and drink from shared jars. Everything about the meal is circular. The sun's movement, the family's formation around the cloth, even the act of tearing bread and passing it on. The bureaucrat's day ends. Today, the scribe had a long morning at the granary office. He reviewed deliveries, counted jars of barley, and scolded a young laborer who mislabeled a shipment. These tasks are dull but important. Grain is currency, after all. Every basket must be accounted for. At midday, he copied a portion of the instructions of Tahodub onto fresh papyrus for his eldest son to memorize. Let thy mouth be sweetened with silence. Speak not against the one who feeds thee. He doesn't say it aloud, but he hopes his son is listening. Before returning home, he left an offering at the local shrine, a few dried dates and a small carved scarab, a gesture of thanks, not for anything in particular, but for another day without catastrophe. That, in Egypt, is reason enough. Now, as he reclines on the mat, his wife places the food gently before him. The beer is poured. The bread is warm. The stew smells of garlic and cumin. It is a quiet meal. No one speaks much. They eat with their hands. They take turns drinking. A small clay oil lamp flickers at the edge of the courtyard. It will burn until bedtime. You watch the scene unfold, not dramatic, not memorable, but achingly human. The same meal in the same place, shared at the same hour for years and years. Time measured not in clocks or battles, but in loaves consumed, pots emptied, shadows moved. A curious absence. And yet, you begin to notice something strange. No one in the household checks the stars. No one seems to care what phase the moon is in tonight. There are no discussions about calendars, eclipses, or heavenly omens. But this is Egypt, a culture famous for its celestial calendars. So where are the signs? And why, in this otherwise perfectly orderly dinner, does no one mention the time of year? It is the next evening, the same courtyard, the same scribe, the same worn brick walls now bathed in warm twilight, but something has changed. There is more food tonight. The loaves are shaped differently, smaller, triangular, and lightly glazed with date syrup. The beer, too, is richer, smoother, and poured from a ceremonial jug. A plate of grilled duck liver sits in the center of the mat, rare and savory. There are extra clay bowls. More neighbors trickle in, bringing small offerings. Onions braided into garlands, a smear of honey preserved in a linen pouch, a pinch of salt wrapped in leaf. No one says why. No one announces a celebration, but the meal is no longer just dinner. It is a feast, quiet, sacred, and perfectly timed. You realize that the answer to yesterday's question, the curious absence of calendar talk, isn't that the Egyptians didn't care about time. They simply carried it within the food. The calendar hidden in the kitchen. Ancient Egyptian meals were not randomly varied. They followed the rhythm of the agricultural calendar, which itself was shaped by the Nile. Each year was divided into 3 seasons. Akhit, inundation, roughly July to November when the Nile flooded. Perit, emergence, November to March when crops began to grow. Shemu, harvest, March to July when grain and produce were collected. But unlike rigid calendars on a wall, these seasons weren't tracked with paper. They were tasted. During Perit, lentils and chickpeas reappeared in meals. During Shemu, onions grew sweet and full. Akhit brought fish and the fermented leftovers of the previous harvest. Tonight, the small feast you're witnessing marks the first moon of Perit. A new planting cycle. A new season of work. That's why the bread is triangular. It resembles the hills of fresh soil pushed up by the plow. That's why the duck liver is served. It's a rare winter delicacy, only eaten when grain begins to rise and workers have energy to spare. Calendars were not separate from daily life. They were daily life. To eat a lentil stew in early Shemu was to acknowledge the season without ever nomming it aloud. Festival meals without festivals. Contrary to modern expectations, not all Egyptian feast days involved public spectacle. Many were small domestic observances, shared between neighbors or within families. Some feasts honored deities, others the dead, and some simply marked celestial alignments. The scribe has memorized many of these days. His training included the Book of Days, a long scroll listing lucky and unlucky dates, agricultural observances, and minor celestial events. But it is not kept in his home. It is in the granary office, on a shelf next to grain tallies and debt ledgers. So how does he remember? Because every ingredient, every flavor is a date. Just as the Babylonian scribe once watched shadows crawl across a courtyard, this Egyptian scribe remembers time by taste. The first appearance of coriander, the return of thick goat milk, the quiet day when honey becomes too thin. Time is culinary. Tonight the neighbors sit on woven mats, children pass bowls, the fire crackles, the moon rises, but no one says, "This is the beginning of parrot." They don't need to. They are eating the new season. That is enough. Offerings to the dead. The scribe, as expected, saves a small portion of the duck liver and bread. He places them in a clay bowl and sets it beside a tall jar. This is not waste. This is a meal for the ancestors. In ancient Egyptian belief, the dead continued to require sustenance. Tombs were built not only as resting places, but as dining rooms for the soul. The deceased could return, in spiritual form, to taste the essence of food left for them. But those without tombs, without status, relied on their descendants to keep their spirits fed. The scribe's father was a modest man, not wealthy, but respected. He is buried in the nearby necropolis beneath a modest slab. Each season, the scribe offers a taste of the new harvest to his father's memory. This act ensures that the dead remain nourished, calm, and at peace. It is not superstition. It is social duty. His son, in turn, watches carefully. One day he will do the same. And what of the gods? Not all meals were personal. Many were public ritual, divinely sanctioned banquets. In the temples, enormous festivals were held in honor of gods like Hathor, Osiris, and Amun. Cattle were slaughtered. Bread was piled high. Beer flowed for days. Musicians played, dancers performed, and priests recited ancient hymns. But for most Egyptians, participation in such events was indirect. They could not attend, but they could replicate. When the festival of Hathor came, women braided flowers into their hair and drank sweet beer at home. During the Apit festival in Thebes, families grilled fish and offered it to tiny household statues. The large feasts echoed into small courtyards like this one. Tonight's meal, while not tied to a great temple festival, carries the same ritual rhythm, a seasonal acknowledgement, a private echo of public religion. You feel it in the way the bowls are passed clockwise, the way the first bite is always shared, the way silence falls at specific moments. This is not just food, it is the Egyptian clock. The bureaucrat's notebook. As the night deepens, the scribe removes a thin piece of scrap papyrus from a basket by the door. It is not for official use, just a personal note. Day of first planting, onion strong, children ate 2 loaves, moon high at duck meal. This is how he tracks the year, not with dates but with dinners. You begin to see time differently now. Less like a sequence of numbers, more like a flavor slowly returning. The same stew, made slightly differently each month, signals where you are in the cycle. You could live your whole life like this without ever owning a calendar and never once be late for a season. But even in this orderly rhythm, a question lingers. What happened when the seasons came too early or too late? The sky is still, but the wind is different tonight. The edges of the Nile shimmer with a faint, unnatural chill. The family's courtyard is quiet. The scribe squats beside the hearth, poking at a low flame with the curved end of a burnt palm branch. His wife kneads a ball of dough harder than usual. The children are not playing. It is dinner time, but something feels off. The lentils should have softened by now. The onions are too small. The bread won't rise as expected. Even the beer tastes thin, slightly sour, as if it fermented too quickly. It is still food, but it's not right. This is what happens when the Nile floods unpredictably, when the river misbehaves. Every year, the life of Egypt depended on the Nile's annual inundation, the Akhet-A rising of waters that flooded the fields, renewed the soil, and signaled the start of the growing season. It was so regular, so predictable, that priests and scribes based entire calendar systems around its movement. But sometimes it didn't come. Sometimes it came too early, other times not enough, or it lingered too long, waterlogged the fields, drowned the barley roots. In these years, food production faltered, not just in numbers but in ritual continuity. The flavors didn't align with the season. Meals became unmoored from the calendar. Tonight you are witnessing one such year. The scribe doesn't speak of it. He doesn't need to. The absence is on every plate. When a stew signals trouble, imagine for a moment that your entire concept of time, your sense of being in season, of being synchronized with the gods and ancestors, was based on what you ate. Then imagine the flavor is wrong. The stew lacks garlic. The fish was salted months ago, not freshly caught. Even the bread, which should have the slight tang of spring grain, tastes flat and thin. It is subtle. But in ancient Egypt, subtle is sacred. This isn't just disappointing, it's disorienting. Without the right foods, how do you know what time of year it is? For the scribe, this dislocation carries implications far beyond hunger. His temple records must match the agricultural cycle. His debt tallies depend on harvest forecasts. His son's memorization of lucky days no longer aligns with visible signs. Even offerings to the ancestors feel misaligned. Why offer onions when the right ones haven't sprouted yet? This is more than a culinary issue. It's a spiritual timing error. How they coped. The ancient Egyptians, ever practical, had ways to adjust. In lean years, households preserved more. They sun-dried fish, buried jars of grain in cool underground pits, fermented beans to extend shelf life. They switched to papyrus root stews, radish paste, and fig leaf infusions, foods usually reserved for the poor or for ritual fasting. These substitutions weren't ideal, but they filled the calendar gap. In wealthier homes, imported spices from Nubia or Punt could mask the blandness. But in this home modest, middle class, the scribe's wife simply adds more salt. Meanwhile, the temple priests quietly recalculate. The Book of Days is amended. Festival dates are adjusted slightly due to the river's delay. The gods, it was believed, understood such matters. After all, even Ra, the sun god, sometimes moved differently. But among the people, the unease remains. You cannot feast on an error. You can only wait until the rhythm returns. Memory and the meal. Still, the family eats, not joyfully but respectfully. The children dip torn bread into a watery bean mash. The scribe sips from his beer with a slight frown. His wife leans back, arms dusted in flour, exhausted. No one mentions that it doesn't taste right, but everyone knows. And yet this meal, too, will be remembered. Later, the scribe makes a note. Lentil stew thin, onions soft not full, moon seen before first planting, Nile late. The note isn't for drama, it's for the future. Maybe one day his grandson will read it and say, "Ah, it happened then too." A slow history written in taste and texture. Egypt's brilliance was not that it avoided disaster, but that it absorbed it into memory. Through food, they tracked not just feasts but famines. Each irregular stew, each dry onion, became part of the larger record. Over time, the nation's resilience was preserved in kitchens as much as in temples. The return of order. Eventually, the flood returned. Eventually, the lentils plumped, the garlic ripened, the triangular bread was sweet again. The beer resumed its proper bubbling and meals aligned with the stars. But tonight, in this one courtyard, you see Egypt in a moment of discomfort, a quiet, edible dissonance. And yet still they gather, they eat, they offer a portion to the dead. Because even when time falters, the act of eating remains, and with it, the hope that tomorrow's meal will taste more like the season it should be. You lean back, letting the smell of charred lentils drift through the air. The children have begun to giggle again, tearing bread into animal shapes. The scribe smiles faintly, even as he scribbles down his observations. And you're left wondering, when we measure time today by clocks and calendars, have we forgotten how to taste it? Story 3. One day in the life of a Roman aqueduct inspector. You wake just before sunrise in the city of Nemesis, what we now call Nims, deep in Roman Gaul, sometime in the 2nd century CE. The air is cool, thick with dew. Outside, a small cart creaks to life, and the smell of olive oil, dust, and old limestone floats through the narrow alleyways. You are not a soldier, or a senator, or a poet. You are something far less glamorous, an Aquarius, an official aqueduct inspector, assigned to monitor the most unappreciated but utterly vital infrastructure in the Roman world, the water supply. Today is inspection day, which means you will be walking a lot. The empire runs on water. Rome's aqueducts are famous, now marble arches striding across landscapes, ruins standing tall against blue skies. But to a Roman bureaucrat like yourself, they are not monuments. They are assets, networks, maintenance problems. Nemesis, like many mid-sized Roman cities, relies on a series of aqueducts and lead piping systems to deliver water from distant springs to public baths, fountains, latrines, and wealthy households. Every drop is accounted for. Every leak is a liability. As you sling your satchel over your shoulder, a leather bag stuffed with wax tablets, styluses, a measuring rope, a tiny hammer, and a few dry figs, you check your day's assignments. 5 segments to walk, 3 vaults to check, 1 complaint from a baker who claims his kneading trough hasn't filled since the last rainfall. A typical Thursday. You begin at the Specus, the covered channel that runs just outside the city wall. The water here is still clear, cold, and flowing fast. Good, but you're not here for that. You're here for trouble. A system built on incline and guesswork. Roman aqueducts weren't powered by pumps. They relied on a delicate gradient, a steady, near-invisible slope that allowed water to flow smoothly over miles. Too steep, and the flow would erode the channel. Too shallow, and the water would stagnate. So your job, in part, is to make sure the slope hasn't shifted. You crouch down, remove a small copper ball from your bag, and gently place it in the open channel. It rolls slowly forward, then stops. A clod of moss, perhaps. You mark the spot on your wax tablet. Segment 12A, blockage suspected. You'll send for laborers tomorrow. Further along, you spot a leak, small, steady, glistening in the morning sun. Water escaping through a hairline crack in the mortar lining the Specus wall. A fine trickle now, but given a week, it could collapse part of the channel. You mark it down. You take a fig from your bag and chew thoughtfully. Behind you, a lizard skitters away into the warm stone. Lead pipes and the politics of pressure. Within the city, things get more complicated. Water is not equally distributed. Public fountains and baths get first priority. Then come temples, administrative buildings, and only then private homes. But of course, wealthy citizens expect more. Part of your job is to inspect lead pipe branches, the infamous fistulae plumbati. These pipes carry water from the main aqueduct line into homes and shops, and each one is fitted with a lead plug, stamped with the owner's name, and the amount of water they're authorized to receive. But lead is soft, easy to tamper with. You arrive at the home of one Flavius Cassianus, a retired cavalry officer with an appetite for garden fountains. His water plug appears altered. You inspect it closely. Someone has widened the pipe, allowing more water to flow than authorized. This is theft, technically. Water was property of the state, and tampering with the plug was punishable, though usually with a fine, unless politics got involved. You note it on your tablet but leave the plug in place. Best to let your superior deal with Flavius. He has friends in the Curia. You're just the inspector. You file the report. You chew another fig. Fountain, fish ponds, and strange requests. Midday now. The sun is high. You stop at a shaded fountain near the Macelum, the market, and refill your water flask. The water here is tepid but clean. A small statue of Neptune burbles gently behind you, and children play at the edge, splashing their hands. A fishmonger approaches. He recognizes you by your satchel. He wants to know if there's a way to pipe water directly into his fish tanks to keep them cool. You shake your head. Technically possible, but it would require a license, a plug, a stamped approval, and a small bribe to your supervisor. He grumbles and walks away. You've had worse requests. One man once petitioned for enough water pressure to power a miniature water organ in his atrium. Another wanted an indoor cold plunge pool for mental clarity. The aqueduct can only carry so much. You continue walking. A slave from the public bathhouse flags you down. Water isn't flowing into the caldarium again. You promise to look into it. Probably another case of lime buildup. Roman water, especially from hillside springs, carried heavy minerals. Over time, this built up in the pipes, narrowing them like cholesterol in a bad heart. Some inspectors used vinegar or brine to break up the deposits. Others simply replaced the pipe. Either way, it's expensive. More paperwork. You sigh, make another note, and press on. The rhythm of water. By late afternoon, your feet ache and your tunic is dusty. You've inspected 9 vaults, 4 plugs, and at least one illegal fountain shaped like a dolphin. The cart that carries replacement tiles has yet to arrive. Your stylus is worn down. Your figs are gone. Still, there's something peaceful about this work. Water flows whether people notice or not. It seeps, spills, fills, and vanishes, a quiet pulse beneath the empire. Your job is to make sure it keeps poolsing. You lean against a low wall and look down at the channel. The water is darker now, catching the red of the setting sun. A faint breeze carries the scent of limestone and laurel. Somewhere nearby, a bathhouse bell clangs once time for the last washing of the day. You stretch your arms, then rub your neck. And just as you prepare to walk home, something catches your eye. A section of the aqueduct arch, high above the southern district, looks misaligned. Only slightly. Just enough that the shadow falls differently. You squint. Could it be a shifted stone, or something worse? The aqueduct arches stretch across the southern edge of Nemesis like a stone spine, part of the great Pont du Gard system that feeds the city. From a distance, the structure still looks solid, elegant, built to last. And yet that single shadow is wrong, off by a hand's width. You climb the path slowly, taking a side route behind a row of olive trees and up onto the embankment. Your sandals scrape over gravel as you approach the arch in question, segment 74C, as listed on your inspection rota. You know it well. You've walked past it dozens of times. It's never given you trouble. Until now. You squat, squint upward, and see the fault, a slight settling of the keystone. Not a collapse, not even a crack, just a tiny misalignment. The sort of thing no one else would notice unless they had spent 20 years watching stone. You press your palm against the side of the pier, warm, stable, but not reassuring. What holds up the empire? Mortar and hope. Roman arches were marvels of engineering, held together not by magic, but by compression. Each stone pressed into the next, and the weight above kept the whole structure locked tight. Remove one and the arch fails. Let water in between them and the mortar weakens. Let roots grow and the keystone can tilt. You reach for your wax tablet and begin to sketch. Segment 74C, slight lean. Suspect erosion at the base. Below the arch, you kneel and inspect the foundation slab. The edge of the stone is damp. A trickle of water has been seeping here not from the aqueduct itself, but from ground runoff, perhaps after last week's storm. It's worn a shallow channel into the clay underlayment. You know what this means. The foundation is being undermined. It's not an emergency, not yet, but if left unchecked, it could compromise the entire span. You take a stylus and note. Segment 74C, foundation erosion observed. Request substructio inspection. Possible reinforcement needed. Priority, medium. You pause, maybe it's priority, high. But if you mark too many things urgent, your reports are ignored. If you mark too few, you become known as the lazy inspector. You leave it as medium. The politics of repairs. Back in town, repairs require approval. Approval requires coin. Coin requires justification. And nothing justifies public works faster than fear of collapse, fear of blame, fear of flooding baths and angry shopkeepers. You'll need to phrase your report carefully. The last time a segment cracked, the entire street flooded and the bathhouse had to close for 6 days. That inspector retired early officially for reasons of health. You wonder if he simply got tired of arguing with stonemasons. You return to the main road and make your way toward the curator aquarum's office, the water commissioner. He'll want your day's findings before sunset. He's a former soldier, fond of clean tunics and sharp opinions. He won't care about lizards or leaking fountains. But segment 74C might interest him, especially if you mention that the baker with the dry trough has begun filing complaints with the temple authorities. Priests, after all, need their dough too. You arrive dusty but presentable. You leave the scroll on his desk, tied with string. Whether he reads it or not is out of your hands. A pause at the baths. With your duties complete, you stop by the public baths not to bathe, you'll do that later, but to listen. The caldarium is full. The hot water is flowing. The problem from this morning has apparently resolved itself, most likely a temporary blockage. Still, you eavesdrop. 2 older men argue over the taste of the water. One claims the water from the old cistern was sweeter. The other insists that lead pipes caused tongue numbness. You stifle a laugh. You've tasted water from 100 sources. None of it is sweet. But their debate reminds you, water is not just infrastructure, it's identity. Cities rise and fall on their aqueducts. A clean, consistent flow means prosperity. A dry fountain means decline. You dip your hand in the tepid basin and look around. Stone pillars, tiled walls, steam curling lazily toward the ceiling. This is what your work supports. Not glory, not conquest, continuity. Home at last. As twilight deepens, you walk home through the narrow back alleys of the city. The scent of garum sauce and singed wheat hangs in the air. Laundry lines droop between walls. Someone nearby is singing badly. At your door, you set down your satchel with a grunt. Your hands are ink-stained, your sandals worn. Another day passed, another dozen inspections logged. Inside, your wife serves a plate of lentils and chickpea mash. No wine tonight, just vinegar water and a loaf of bread. You chew slowly, absently nodding how your house's plumbing makes a faint gurgling sound. Tomorrow, you'll check the atrium pipe, just in case. You light a small oil lamp, pull out your personal wax tablet and write. Arch at 74C settling slightly, mortar still intact, foundations shallow. You stare at the line for a moment. Then, almost without thinking, you add, will likely hold through the winter. And then pause. Unless we get another storm. You blow out the lamp. The aqueduct hums, unseen, above the city. And you wonder, who will remember all these inspections after you're gone? Dawn breaks with a low whistle of wind over the limestone hills. There is a chill in the air, a signal of early spring. From the rooftops of Nemesis, you can see mist rising gently from the countryside. curling like smoke around the olive groves and fig trees. Somewhere out there, the aqueduct arches still stand, stretching across the land like the arm of the empire itself. But something is different this morning. You wake to the sound of running feet. Not soldiers, not vendors, children shouting in alarm. You dress quickly, barely finishing the belt of your tunic, and step into the street. At the south end of the city, near the merchant quarter, a thin stream of water is cutting through the dust, meandering unnaturally between stones. It glints in the sunlight, far too clean to be a runoff from a bathhouse. It has the look of something fresh, something pressurized, something that shouldn't be here. You follow it. Vast. The crack in the stone. By the time you reach segment 74C, there's already a crowd. Not panicked, not yet, but watchful. A few shopkeepers are gathered on a low hill, murmuring to one another. A young boy points upward. And there it is. A hairline fracture, no more than a hand's width, splitting the base of one of the aqueduct's support piers. Water is seeping from the joint between two massive stones, not gushing, not catastrophic, but steady, relentless. You step forward, press your fingers to the stream. Cool, fresh. It's from the channel above the specus. It means water is leaking through the arch structure itself, which means the integrity has been breached. This isn't hypothetical anymore. You kneel beside the base, clearing moss and dirt, and see the cause. The foundation slab has shifted, likely from the runoff you observed yesterday, slowly wearing away the earth beneath. The pressure of the water above combined with last night's brief rain was enough to stress the stones. You were right, and maybe a little too late. The imperial response, slow and careful. You dispatch a boy with a message tablet to the office of the curator aquarum. Another runner goes to the quarry for replacement stone. Laborers from the Opus Publicum, the public works crew, arrive within the hour. They carry tools, pulleys, and lengths of rope, but they wait for your instructions. Not because you are important, but because you are the one who noticed. The first step is diversion. You close a small stone valve upstream, redirecting the flow into a secondary channel, an older bypass rarely used except in emergencies. The water slows. The leak becomes a trickle. You breathe. That's one disaster averted. Next, you take measurements. The crack will need to be chiseled out, filled with fresh opus signum, a mortar mix of lime, ash, and crushed tile. The shifted foundation slab may need to be underpinned with compacted gravel and new limestone. It's not glorious work. It's muddy, backbreaking. But it will hold. At least for now. Water, time, and trust. By mid-afternoon, the work is underway. Stones are being shaped, mortar mixed. Your sandals are caked in clay, your fingers stained with grit. You've skipped your midday meal, save for a half-eaten fig, but you feel content, purposeful. This is what it means to hold up the empire, even if only by inches. It is not conquest, not oration. It is a wall of lime, a trickle of water, a line drawn in wax. You recall a phrase inscribed on a pipe segment you once saw during an inspection near Rome. Aqua ad vitam, vita ad laborum. Water for life, life for work. You've thought about that a lot. To the people who pass you on the street, you are just a civil servant with a measuring rope and tired eyes. But to the city, you are a guardian of flow, of rhythm, of trust, because the aqueduct does not just carry water. It carries confidence that the system is still working, that someone is watching, that when a pipe cracks or a shadow falls strangely on a stone, someone notices, writes it down, shows up. Evening reflections. By the time the last mortar is applied, the sun is dipping behind the city's tiled rooftops. The public bathhouse bell rings once, a low echo through the streets. People resume their routines. Water begins to flow again, this time through the temporary bypass. The crisis, if you can call it that, has passed. You walk home slowly. Your knees ache. Your satchel is heavier with fresh notes, and still your thoughts linger on the arch. You know it will need more repairs next season. That erosion is patient. That gravity always wins in the end. But for now, the aqueduct stands. And so do you. At home, you pour a small bowl of vinegar water and tear a piece of flatbread. Your wife raises an eyebrow, asking without asking. You nod. Segment 74C, you say. She grimaces knowingly and sets a second bowl beside yours. Later that night, you step outside one last time. The moon hangs low above the arches, casting faint silver across the city. You can't see the crack from here, but you know exactly where it is. You close your eyes and wonder, when the aqueduct finally falls, will anyone remember who held it up all those quiet years before? Story 4. The Forgotten Postman of the Inca Empire. The wind in the Andes is sharp, high, and clean. It curls through mountain passes like a whispered warning, carrying the scent of moss, stone, and damp earth. Below you, narrow terraces cling to impossibly steep slopes. Above, the clouds hang low, almost within reach. Somewhere far ahead, the path twists out of sight around a jagged rock face, and on that path a man is running. Not just jogging or walking briskly, running, as if it were his only job. Because it is. You are following a chasqui, one of the official runners of the Inca Empire. And today, like every day, he carries no map, no parchment, no written orders. What he carries instead is a quipu, a bundle of colored strings knotted with a secret language, and the immense responsibility of keeping a sprawling empire connected, one footfall at a time. His breath is even, his pace is exact, his destination, unknown to you for now, but it's at least 5 leagues away and he will reach it before dusk. He always does. The empire without wheels or writing. At its height in the 15th century, the Inca Empire stretched over 2,500 miles from what is now Colombia to central Chile. It was the largest empire in the pre-Columbian Americas, and yet it had no wheels, no horses, and no written language. Instead, it had feet, paths, and quipu. And Chasqui's young men trained from childhood to run long distances at high altitude with astonishing speed and endurance. They were the living messengers of the empire, part athlete, part bureaucrat, part human relay station. The Chasqui in front of you wears a simple tunic, a woven headband, and a pouch across his chest. Inside is the quipu, a knotted cord that, to the untrained eye, looks like a tangle of yarn. But to another trained Chasqui, or to Nquipucamiac, keeper of quipu records, it is perfectly legible. One cord means maize, another is army supplies. A third, blue, looped at the base, signals something about llamas. It is both a record and a message compressed into fiber. He adjusts it briefly as he runs, ensuring it doesn't tangle. Then he speeds up. The road beneath his feet. The runner's path is not just any trail. It is part of the Quihapac-Nyan, the great Inca road system, over 25,000 miles of carefully engineered trails that connected every major point in the empire. These roads were built with flattened stones, rope bridges, and even carved staircases that wound through cloud forest, desert, glacier, and jungle. Some were wide enough for 2 travelers to pass. Others were barely more than a groove in a mountainside. But all were marked, all maintained. And at regular intervals, about every 6 to 9 kilometers, there were tambos, small relay stations built of stone, stocked with basic supplies, and more importantly, another chasqui waiting in the shade. Because the Inca message system relied on a relay model, no one ran the full distance. Instead, when a runner approached a tambo, he would call out the message, pass the quipu, and without slowing down, hand off the entire task to the next runner who would continue the sprint. In this way, a message could travel over 150 miles in a single day. Faster, in many cases, than the mounted couriers of Europe. And faster than any outsider expected. training for a life of silence and speed. From an early age, boys chosen for the Chasqui system train not only in running, but in navigation, memorization, and message delivery. They learned how to read the mountains like a book where wind patterns changed, where thin air turned to thick, where jaguar prints might signal danger. They were not allowed to marry. They lived on roasted maize, dried meat charqui, coca leaves, and spring water. Their task was sacred and their training was relentless. You see it now as the runner reaches a steep incline. He doesn't pause. His sandals' leather strips tied around calloused feet dig into the rock, and he leans forward into the climb like it's just another flat stretch of road. His breathing remains steady. He murmurs a few words under his breath, perhaps repeating the verbal portion of the message, just to keep it clear. He is part athlete, part monk, part machine. And what happens if he fails? Of course, runners could fall. Roads could wash out. A quipu could snag, tear, or be dropped into a ravine. So how did the empire prepare? Every message was redundant, sent in twos, sometimes threes. One chasqui would follow another by a few tambos just in case. Messages could be oral, visual, or nodded, and ideally all three. Memory was backed by fiber. Fiber was backed by memory. And if the message was sensitive, say, orders for a military movement or news of the emperor's plans, a quipucamiok would often ride with the runners to interpret it at the end point, ensuring nothing was misunderstood. But in most cases, the chasquis handled it all. As the sun rises higher and the air warms, you and the runner reach a tambo, a squat, shaded hut nestled beneath a cluster of wind-twisted trees. Another young man, nearly identical in dress and manner, steps out. They exchange not words but a glance, a motion, and a brief nod. The quipu changes hands. And with that, the first chasqui stops, drinks from a nearby spring, and eats a mouthful of dried coca leaf. He has done his part. The second runner disappears up the trail. The message continues. The silence of an empire. And that's how it works. A message, urgent or dull, leaves Cusco at dawn, and by sunset it may have traveled the length of a province. It could be about a birth, a theft, a need for more potatoes in a garrison, a change in tribute, or the death of a noble. It could be about the movement of a comet or a single missing llama. Each message matters. Each runner runs. And most of their names are forgotten. You watch the first chasqui lean back against the tambo wall, eyes half closed, breathing calm and slow. He'll rest, then return down the mountain, picking up a southbound message. He won't complain, he won't boast, he will just run. And you may ask yourself, if you ran messages for an empire without ever leaving a written word, would anyone remember you ran at all? Morning has passed, and the second chasqui, the one who took the knotted message at the tambo, has already run nearly 2 leagues. His feet move over damp earth, pressed flat and smooth by centuries of traffic. There are no signposts, no maps. Only the mountain, the sky, and the narrow thread of path beneath him. You are running with him now, silently just behind. Every step is precise, every breath measured. He does not sprint like a sprinter. He glides, body tilted slightly forward, knees lifting in a rhythm that matches the terrain. The quipu bounces gently against his chest with every stride, its knots and cords barely moving. It is easy to forget that beneath all of this, the speed, the efficiency, the purpose, there is no paper, no ink, no alphabet. There are only roads. The backbone of the Andes. The Quihapac Nyan, or Royal Road, was the most advanced transportation system in pre-Columbian America. Constructed by thousands of laborers across generations, it threaded through some of the world's most punishing geography: mountain ridges, ravines, deserts, forests, highland passes, all with a level of engineering precision that astonished even the Spanish invaders when they saw it. This wasn't one road, but a network, with primary arteries linking the imperial capital at Cusco to outposts as far as modern-day Ecuador and Argentina. These roads weren't just about speed, they were about connection. Economic, spiritual, political. Wherever the road went, the empire followed. Our Chasqui passes a way marker carved into a boulder, a faint symbol denoting this stretch as sacred, part of the Inca trail leading toward the Temple of the Sun. He touches the stone briefly in passing. Not a ritual, just habit. Further ahead, the road narrows to a ledge carved directly into the rock. Below, a sheer drop. No railing, just the sound of wind and the distant cry of condors. His pace doesn't change. You slow instinctively, he does not. He's run this path 100 times. Bridges made of grass. Now the road leads to one of the marvels of the Inca system, a rope bridge, suspended across a yawning gorge. It is built entirely from woven grass, reinforced with layers of fiber braided by specialized artisans from nearby villages. These bridges were rebuilt every year in a communal effort called Minca, shared labor performed as a civic and spiritual duty. The bridge sways gently in the breeze, its deck made of braided ropes and sticks. The Chasqui doesn't hesitate. He steps onto the bridge, arms loose at his sides, eyes forward. The cords creak faintly underfoot. Each step is deliberate, balanced. You cross behind him carefully. Below, the river is barely a ribbon. This is what empire looks like when it doesn't rely on wheels or steel, just stone, grass, and trust. Messages worth running for. What exactly is in this quipu? You'll never know for sure. Only the Quipucamayoc, the trained Nach readers, can interpret it. And even among them, only some can decipher the finer, more abstract messages. Some Quipus recorded population totals, harvest yields, tribute quotas. Others represented more delicate things, promises, marriages, births, debts. But no matter the content, the runner doesn't know it. He doesn't need to. His job is not to understand, only to deliver. Still, he's not an empty vessel. He also carries a verbal message memorized word for word, to be repeated aloud when the quipu is handed off. Often, these spoken lines serve as context or clarification. The maize harvest from Pachacutex terraces will exceed the estimate by 400 bundles. The priest of the moon temple is requesting cloth and coca for the solstice. The alpaca herds at Vilcabamba have dwindled. The shepherd is ill. The spoken message is brief but vital. In the moment of handoff, the quipu is passed, the message is spoken, and the memory is transferred like water between vessels. Then the next runner begins, and the old one returns home or takes a new message in the opposite direction. The life between the footfalls. We think of messengers as footnotes, names rarely recorded, lives quickly passed. But the Chasqui is more than a courier. He is part of a sacred rhythm, a human heartbeat pulsing along a stone artery. He knows the feel of cold air in his lungs at 14,000 feet. He knows the shift in wind that means snow is coming. He knows where a spring bubbles up behind a lichen-covered stone and which birds sing before rain. He lives between tambos, in the in-between places most never stop to notice. And he accepts this. At a flat stretch near a ruined way station, he slows. He reaches into his pouch for a handful of toasted maize, chews, then tucks a wad of coca leaves into his cheek. Not for pleasure, but for endurance. It will steady his breathing and keep fatigue at bay. He closes his eyes for a moment, then resumes the run. You notice now that the sun is starting to dip westward. Soon, another tambo will appear, and another Chasqui will step into the light. The message, silent, nodded, and carried in memory, will pass again. Like it has for centuries. Like it always does. And yet you may wonder, what happened to the messages when the empire fell, but the runners kept running? The sun has nearly vanished now, its golden light bleeding across the peaks and spilling into the deep folds of the valley. The shadows stretch long across the stone path. Mist rises from the lowlands, curling like fingers around the base of the mountains. The air is quiet, crisp, almost reverent. The Chasqui reaches the next tambo where the last runner of the day waits. He is younger barely of age and his legs jitter with nervous energy. You watch as the quipu is passed, the memorized message whispered carefully. The young man nods. No written record, no questions, no hesitation. He runs. But this is not just any delivery. It is one of the final days before the empire changes forever. What the runner doesn't know, what no one knows just yet, is that far to the north, Spanish soldiers have already entered the Inca heartland. Their horses are unfamiliar, their armor blinding. They carry thundersticks that belch smoke and death, and they do not care for quipu. They have never heard of tambos. They do not run. The empire breaks, the roads remain. Within a generation, the administrative heart of the Inca Empire will collapse. The royal roads will no longer carry tax records and food orders. The tambos will empty. The runners will stop. And yet for a time they do not. Because even as the empire disintegrates, even as Cusco falls and Atahualpa is captured, messages must still move. Local leaders still need to coordinate. Resistance networks still rely on movement, knowledge, and warning. Farmers still trade. Ceremonies still need dates and supplies. The roads continue, and so do the runners. There are stories unwritten, but passed through oral tradition of Chasquis who continued to deliver messages for years after the empire's official end. Some fled to the hills of Vilcabamba, where the last Inca rulers held out. Others worked quietly for local Curacas chiefs, carrying word from one hidden village to the next. One tale tells of a runner who carried the same quipu, undelivered, for months, refusing to break the chain, even though he no longer had a destination. He ran anyway. Until one day he stopped, and no one was left to receive the knots. The quipu unraveled. When the Spaniards arrived, they found the quipu odd, suspicious. Primitive, they said, a bunch of strings, surely not real communication. And yet they saw the system worked. They saw food arrive on time, troops relocate swiftly. The precision disturbed them. Some colonial administrators tried to learn the quipu system, others banned it. Some Quipucamiocs were imprisoned, some were executed. And the meaning of the knots, so dependent on oral memory, began to fade. The chords survived in museums and storerooms, but the language evaporated. Because without the runners, the quipu was just string. A map with no reader, a song with no voice. The legacy beneath your feet. But not all was lost. Today, if you walk the Andes, you will still find stretches of the Quhapac Nyan. Paths worn smooth by thousands of years of sandals. Tambos in ruins but recognizable. In some villages, people still gather to repair ancient bridges as their ancestors once did. And in a few places, quiet, forgotten places, there are descendants of Chasquis, not officially trained, not state-sanctioned, but runners nonetheless, delivering herbs to a neighboring village, carrying messages up the mountain where no road goes, teaching their sons where to rest, where to find the spring behind the mossy rock. The empire is gone, but the road is still there. And somewhere a man is still running. The quietest triumph. Not every civilization survives through war or stone. Some survive through rhythm. The Inca did not leave behind grand libraries or epic scrolls. They left footsteps, worn trails, a system of human endurance built on trust, memory, and an unshakable sense of duty. It's easy to forget the Chasquis, just as it's easy to forget the infrastructure of any empire. But behind every leader, every plan, every success, there was always someone moving quietly, quickly, across impossible terrain, carrying nothing but knots and words. And now, in this final stretch of fading light, as you imagine one last runner disappearing down a dusty slope, you might wonder, When history forgets the message, does the path still matter? Story 5. A merchant's quiet walk through the Tang Dynasty silk market. The sun is barely up over the city of Chang'an, the beating heart of the Tang Dynasty, the eastern terminus of the Silk Road, and in the 8th century, arguably the most cosmopolitan city on earth. The streets are still quiet. The air is cool and carries the soft scent of incense, steamed dumplings, and dust. You are walking behind a cloth merchant, an unassuming man with dust on his boots and a ledger tucked into his sleeve. He moves through the city like a man who belongs to it but doesn't expect it to notice. Today, he is headed to the West Market, not for drama, not for riches, but to check his stall, greet his contacts, and most importantly, adjust the price of indigo. The silk trade is not all caravans and camels. Sometimes it is about sitting quietly, sipping tea, and haggling over dyes. A market divided by direction. In Chang'an, the capital of the Tang Empire, everything has its place. The city itself is built on a grid, with wide avenues and strict zoning. The East Market is mostly for locals' daily goods, small luxuries, the occasional tooth powder or paper fan. But the West Market, where the merchant is going now, is the hub of international trade. Here, Sogdian traders in bright robes barter with Persian jewelers. Buddhist monks from India sit beside silversmiths from Samarkand. The merchant hears snatches of Greek, Sanskrit, and Arabic as he walks. But he is not dazzled. This is his 4th decade in the city. He keeps his eyes on the path, nodding to a fruit seller who once owed him a favor and never repaid it. You follow him through the morning haze as he slips past a checkpoint, one of many in the market. The guards do not stop him. They've seen him every week for years. He enters the textiles quarter. It is early yet. The stalls are still shuttered. A few assistants sweep the flagstones. Someone is unpacking bolts of rough hemp cloth, and the smell of raw dye, metallic and sweet, drifts from a nearby vat. It smells like work. The ledger and the loom. The merchant arrives at his stall, a wooden booth beneath a tiled overhang, its interior stacked neatly with fabric bundles wrapped in oilcloth. No dramatic signage, no yelling, just a bench, a bamboo stool, and a narrow shelf lined with ledger scrolls. He opens one. The scroll is filled with tight, efficient characters. Not poetry, not art, just names, weights, dates, and prices. He runs his finger down the list, looking for the line marked Huiju Indigo, second quality. The price must change. Not because of imperial decree, but because a caravan came in last night from the south. Rumor says the harvest of indigo plants was smaller this year. The merchant needs to reflect that in the price, not too high or buyers will leave. Not too low or his competitors will undercut him. This is the delicate math of daily trade, just boring enough to be crucial. He adjusts the price by half a tael of silver per bolt, makes a note, then leans back and waits. Trade without spectacle. Popular imagination paints the Silk Road as a dramatic caravan trail across the desert, filled with danger and glory. But for merchants like this one, most of the job is quiet. He doesn't ride camels, he doesn't cross mountains. He sits in a city, listens to rumors, tracks supply, monitors demand, and moves fabric. Sometimes he deals with brocade from Sichuan, other times plain silk from the Yangtze Valley or dyed cotton from India. But the majority of his sales are to tailors, seamstresses, and other middlemen. Buyers come, inspect the fabric, haggle briefly, and move on. No drama, no shouting. The merchant is a small link in a very long chain, and he knows it. Still, he's respected. Cloth is a necessity, and his quiet reliability has earned him loyal customers. A monk stops by to inquire about saffron-dyed linen. The merchant does not sell it but tells him where to go. He gestures toward an alley behind the coppersmith's lane. The monk bows and walks on. The merchant records the monk's request in the margin of his scroll. Not because he needs to, but because one day, saffron might be worth carrying. Tea talk and tolerance. By mid-morning, the market comes alive. Musicians tune strings. A perfume vendor sprinkles rosewater on her stall. A Sogdian spice seller lays out his cardamom pods with near-religious precision. The merchant pours tea. No customers yet, but he doesn't mind. He watches the flow of people, notes who is buying what. A young seamstress across the lane sells 3 bolts of red silk. Interesting, he thinks. Weddings coming up. Another trader, a competitor, walks past. They nod. Perhaps tomorrow they'll meet for lunch and quietly agree not to lower prices below a certain point. The guild rules allow such discussion in private. There is no rush. The merchant knows the day will bring what it brings. He drinks his tea, checks the shadow on the ground. It's nearly time for the government tax officer to make his daily sweep. He unrolls a clean section of his ledger and prepares to write down the amount he'll declare. Not the true total, of course, just the correct one. The whisper of wealth. At no point today will the merchant shout, boast, or chase anyone down the street. He will sell a few bolts of silk. He will lend credit to a tailor. He may buy 3 samples of wool from a man who speaks bad Chinese but offers good prices. And yet, by the end of the month, he will have moved enough cloth to clothe a village. He is not rich, not flashy, but his stall will still be here next season. And the city, this vast, breathing machine of officials, pilgrims, thieves, and scholars, will still need cloth. The merchant smooths his ledger again, frowns. The price of indigo may rise further next week. And so you ask yourself, when history writes of emperors and generals, who will write about the man who priced the thread? The afternoon sun filters through the latticed canopy of the West Market, casting soft geometric shadows on the stone tiles below. The noise has risen, not chaotic but layered. The rhythm of a settled city. Footsteps, murmured haggling, a short laugh, the faint chime of a hanging weight on a bronze scale. The merchant is still in his stall, still seated on the bamboo stool, but now surrounded by activity. 3 bolts of silk have sold already. 2 tailors stopped by with orders for red and black thread. And now, an unusual visitor approaches, a foreign envoy, likely from one of the smaller kingdoms west of Dunhuang. He walks with the slightly stiff posture of a man trying to both impress and not offend. His robes are clean but travel-worn. He is accompanied by a young interpreter who does most of the speaking. The merchant greets him politely, offers tea, offers silence. The envoy pulls a small sample cloth from a leather pouch. It is rough but colorful, dyed in a pattern unfamiliar to the merchant. The weave is loose, but the technique is curious. A local fabric, perhaps from the Fergana Valley or even farther west. The envoy wants to trade. Not coin, knowledge. Cloth as communication. In the Tang dynasty, fabric was more than clothing, it was a message, a way to convey status, origin, even belief. Imperial court dress had rules encoded into every fold and thread. Colors were regulated. Weaves could imply rank. Dye was chemistry, economy, and ritual. This sample cloth, rough as it is, contains secrets. The envoy wants to learn about Chinese dyeing methods, especially the deep indigo and the elusive golden yellow derived from turmeric and gardenia. In return, he offers the pattern on the fabric, a regional method of tie-dyeing that creates star-like designs. Popular, he says, in his kingdom. The merchant listens. He does not nod, he does not commit. But he carefully rolls the sample between his fingers, feels the tension of the fibers, observes the way it resists the crease. He is not interested in beauty. He is interested in durability, technique, potential resale. He sets the cloth aside gently. Later, he will take it to a weaver he trusts and ask for an opinion. For now, he simply smiles and offers the envoy a piece of plain Tang silk in exchange, undyed, medium grade, meant for experimentation. It is not a deal. It is a beginning. Trade runs on trust. It is easy to imagine international commerce as a flurry of transactions, paperwork, signatures, contracts. But in 8th century Chang'an, especially among merchants, the first trade was always trust. A cup of tea, a quiet inspection of a sample, an offer not of gold, but of possibility. Deals were not sealed in shouting, they were sealed in memory. And this merchant, old as he is, remembers every face. He has no ledger entry yet for the envoy, but there will be one soon. And it will not read foreigner from west, it will read man with star cloth, speaks through boy, knows nothing of dye but wants to. The merchant has written worse. The market after midday. As the envoy leaves, the merchant stretches his legs and steps briefly away from the stall. A neighbor watches it for him, a seller of buttons and toggles who owes him a small favor. The merchant uses this time to walk the rows. Not to buy, to observe. There's a new seller of muslin, young, overly eager, pricing too low, it won't last. A tin merchant has posted a sign in both Chinese and Persian. Clever. A woman in the corner stall, usually reliable, seems distracted today. Her assistant handles customers while she stares into space. A family death, perhaps. The merchant will check in tomorrow discreetly. He walks past a noodle cart, where a clerk from the tax office eats quickly, still in his robe. The merchant notes the face. Back at his own stall, a porter arrives, carrying a small crate wrapped in palm fronds. The merchant opens it carefully. Inside, fresh indigo cakes, dense, fragrant, from Huizhou, just as expected. He breaks one open with a small knife. Dark blue dust clings to the blade. The quality is good. He rechecks the morning's pricing in his ledger. It will hold. For now. The cloth that isn't sold. In the corner of the stall sits a covered bundle, wrapped in red silk, tied with a cord. It is not inventory, it is not for sale. Inside, the merchant's private archive. Swatches of fabric from every major source he's dealt with. Not full bolts, just squares. Each tied with a ribbon, marked with ink on a tag. There's a piece of wool from Sogdia, a bolten from Sichuan, a shimmering scrap of brocade from a client he hasn't seen in 10 years. And in the back, a piece of gold-threaded silk from the imperial factory, a gift once, too valuable to sell, too dangerous to display. Sometimes when the market is quiet and dusk falls early, the merchant opens the bundle, just to remember. He doesn't say this aloud, but that collection is his true treasure. The things no one else asked for. The cloth no one else knows he kept. The whisper of the city. As the shadows lengthen, the merchant returns to his stool. The noise of the market begins to ebb. Some sellers close early. Others prepare for the night trade, lanterns, music, the occasional wine cellar. The merchant rolls his shoulders, closes his ledger, and watches the crowd shift. Somewhere across the market, someone sings a few lines of poetry, soft, slow, out of tune. And you ask yourself, when a market forgets its quietest voice, does the cloth still carry his name? Evening settles gently over Chang'an. The West Market begins to shudder, stall by stall. Cloth is folded. Lamps are lit. Carts creak beneath the weight of unsold goods being wheeled home through wide city gates. The merchant sits quietly in the dimming light, watching the sky go from gold to blue to something soft and smoke-colored. He does not pack up yet. Not because he expects another sale, there are rarely any at this hour, but because he has learned, over decades, that the last hour of the market tells you more than the first. A buyer who comes late is either desperate, secretive, or wise enough to wait. You wait with him quietly, as the crowd thins and the city exhales. A final customer. A woman approaches. She wears simple robes, but they are freshly washed. Her belt is knotted with a lacquered hairpin, worn not in her hair but as a clasp. Her hands are strong, Not the hands of a noblewoman or a poet, but someone who works perhaps as seamstress. She does not introduce herself. Instead, she asks for unbleached silk 4 bolts, thin weave, no dye, even grain. The merchant says nothing. He rises slowly, steps behind his stall, and selects a wrapped bundle from the 3rd shelf. He unties the cord, rolls back the cloth, and unfolds a section. The woman inspects it. She runs the edge through her fingers, sniffs it. She nods. No bargaining. She knows the value, so does he. She pays in coin, not credit. Enough for a good meal, but not a fortune. They exchange polite bows. She leaves. The merchant writes one final note in his ledger. Woman with pin belt, no name, bought 4 bolts unbleached, good hands. He does not write, likely making robes for mourning. He does not need to. What the ledger really holds. With no more customers, the merchant begins to close the stall. He stacks the bolts, brushes the shelves, folds his chair. Before rolling up his ledger for the night, he lingers on the older entries, ones written in fainter ink, on pages frayed at the corners. There are names here he has not seen in years. Some have left the city. Some have moved to court. Some have likely died. Yet the lines remain. Red brocade ordered by J. Shu for daughter's marriage. S. Yanju paid late again, kind eyes. Apprentice spilled dye, lost 1 bolt, no punishment. These notes were never meant for inspectors or records. They're not tax entries or receipts. They are memory, not of profits but of people. That, more than silk or silver, is what the ledger protects. The quiet architecture of trade. Merchants are not often remembered in history. They are not crowned. They do not lead armies. They do not inspire poems, at least not flattering ones. But every robe in the court, every canopy over a temple gate, every scrap of embroidered cloth on a pilgrim's pack passed through hands like his. And for every known name in a history scroll, there are 1,000 unknown ones in a merchant's ledger. Daughters married, parents buried, monks clothed, generals robed, puppeteers outfitted for festivals no one will write about. The merchant does not mind being forgotten. He only minds if the cloth does not last. Night falls over the West Market. By the time he folds the final curtain over his stall, the market is quiet again. A few lamps sway in the wind. A guard walks past, nodding once. The merchant locks the stall with a carved peg. His satchel hangs lightly at his side. He walks home slowly, through streets that feel more like garden paths than avenues. Past the fruit cellar, already closed. Past the checkpoint, now half dozing. He does not speak, he does not rush. He will return tomorrow, as he has for 40 years. And someone, perhaps, will ask again for indigo. Perhaps not. Still, the stall will be there. And so will the ledger. A last thought. In 1,000 years, the silk he sold may be gone, the stall replaced, the roads renamed. But the robe someone was married in, the wrapping around a sacred statue, the banner over a child's bed, all may have once passed through his fingers. And so you wonder, when cloth survives but names do not, is that still memory or something quieter? Story 6. How a Sogdian trader counted his coins in the windy steppes. There is no sound more persistent on the Central Asian steppe than the wind. It rustles through the low grasses, sings against the sides of canvas tents, and whistles between the ribs of abandoned caravan markers. The sky is enormous, too big for the mind to hold, and the earth is flat, dry, and patient. And in the midst of all this emptiness, a Sogdian trader kneels beside a leather sack, counting his coins. One by one. Slowly. You are sitting nearby, perhaps beneath the shade of a yak-hide awning, watching the man at work. He is not young. His beard is threaded with silver. His robe, once richly dyed, has faded under too many suns, but his hands are steady. Each coin clicks against the next with a quiet certainty, a rhythm that is not rushed by the howling air. This is not a moment of triumph. It's accounting the slow, methodical spine of every successful caravan. The Sogdians, middlemen of the Silk Road. To many, the name Sogdian means little today. But in the early centuries of the Common Era, especially between the 4th and 9th centuries, the Sogdians were the arteries of the Silk Road, moving goods, messages, and money between China, Persia, India, and Byzantium. They were not conquerors or kings. They were traders born in the fertile Zarafshan Valley in cities like Samarkand and Bukhara. Polyglot, adaptive, quietly brilliant. This trader, the one now balancing a copper coin on his palm, is not wealthy by imperial standards, but in the language of caravan life, he is stable. His horses are fed. His debts are minimal. His record of deliveries is clean. He counts not to hoard but to track. And to remember. Because every coin in his pouch tells a story. Currencies of the road. The coins do not match. Some are Tang Dynasty copper, square-holed and worn. Others are silver dirhams from the Abbasid Caliphate, marked with curling script he cannot read, but has memorized. There's a Byzantine solidus or two kept mostly for prestige and a few odd lumps of raw silver, counted not by face but by weight and feel. There is no single currency on the Silk Road. The Sogdian trader does not rely on borders. He relies on conversion rates memorized over years of trade, and on small wax tablets scratched with running tallies. You watch as he stacks the dirhams, then separates the copper coins by dynasty. Tang, later Jin, and one rare piece minted under the rebel state of Enlushan, its value questionable, but some collectors find it charming. This isn't money, it's navigation. He is not getting rich, he is getting through. A camp without ceremony. Around him the caravan rests. Donkeys drink from a slow stream. Blankets are aired. Two boys argue over how many turns it takes to twist a rope strong enough for the next bridge crossing. The cooks boil millet. No one pays the coin counter much attention. They know this is his quiet ritual. Every afternoon before the next stretch of road, he does the same. Count the coins. Check the debts. Note the exchanges. Fold the tablet. Rest. He does not boast. He does not gamble. He does not lend except to family. That is why his caravan survives. Windswept debts and threadbare ledgers. The wind picks up again. The trader pulls a linen wrap over the coins to keep the dust away. He recalls a time when he trusted the wrong man, an eager trader from Dunhuang who offered dyed wool at too low a price. The shipment was full of moths. He lost 2 pack animals worth of trade. He learned, wrote it down, marked the man's name in his personal ledger with a black circle A warning symbol, not public, not shared, just his own quiet red flag. Now every few weeks, he opens that ledger goat parchment, stitched with thread, and rereads the warnings. Not for anger, for clarity. The coins are his future. The ledger is his past. He needs both. When the numbers don't add up. Today, though, something's wrong. The count is off by 6 coins, not much, but enough. He checks the pile again, separates the silvers, measures a coin, weight against a balanced stone, nothing missing, nothing stolen, but the value is wrong. Then he remembers the tea merchant at the last outpost had rounded down his payment, promising to make it up at the next crossing. A handshake deal, not uncommon, but easy to forget. He sighs, makes a note in the wax tablet. T-Man Charklik, 06 copper, trust 3.5. He adds a small symbol next to the entry and I, meaning, watch carefully. It's not a grievance, just a memory. Then he returns to the count. 6 coins short, but accounted for. The books still balance. The wind carries names away. Later he'll join the others for supper. A stew of lentils and onions, nothing special. A fire, a few quiet jokes, maybe someone will hum a caravan tune. But no one will talk about the coins. Only he remembers them, carries them, tracks their journey. And you sitting nearby might wonder. When a trader forgets his coins, who forgets the trader? Night has settled on the steppe. The fire crackles low. The last of the stew has been scraped from the pot. Around the camp, silhouettes move like shadows, murmured voices, slow movements, the creaking stretch of tired limbs settling onto rolled mats. Someone coughs. Someone else hums a lullaby in a language half the camp doesn't understand, but no one minds. The Sogdian trader is awake. Still, you see him near the fire's edge, the amber glow flickering in the dark pools under his eyes. He is not restless, only exact. Tonight is bookkeeping night. Once a month, or sometimes every 15 days depending on trade volume, he opens the real book, not the wax tally for daily sales, but the cloth-bound ledger he hides under a blanket in a cedar-lined chest. Not because he fears theft, but because this book is his memory. And memory is fragile in the wind. The parchment that remembers. The ledger is older than most of the men in the caravan. Its pages are stitched from animal hide, thin and soft as a prayer. Ink is precious, so the writing is compact. Not ornate, not poetic, just steady. Line after line, entry after entry. You glance over his shoulder as he turns a page. 2 bolts sold. Buyer D. Tashkent, paid in white jade beads, value agreed. Mule hired to Y, name forgotten, returned injured, deducted 1/3 payment. Samarkand order fulfilled, brother satisfied, brought walnut oil as gift. These are not dramatic records, there are no epics here, just small facts, simple exchanges. A man's quiet life of commerce distilled into ink. He uses a reed stylus sharpened to a needle's point, dips it into walnut ink, writes with deliberate care. Every mark matters. One error can echo down the road. Not just a ledger. To most eyes, this is just accounting, but you begin to notice that some entries are strange. Mixed in with prices and names are symbols: a teardrop, a mountain, a spiral, a cracked jar. You ask about them. He shrugs, explains that the symbols are shorthand for things not easily written. A teardrop equals buyer was grieving, didn't haggle. A mountain equals dangerous terrain, avoid if storm season. A spiral equals confusing deal, might try again. Cracked jar, promised goods arrived broken, buyer unhappy. It is not a code, it is context, emotion, environment, weather, memory. The kind of things that fade if not written down. He doesn't trust memory alone, not out here, not with so many roads behind him. A map in numbers. Midway through the book is a folded page. He opens it carefully. Inside is a rough map, not geographic, not drawn to scale, but economic. Circles represent towns, lines show caravan routes, little tick marks show frequency of trade. Crosshatches mean buyer here is impatient. A checkmark means daughter will inherit shop. It's the Silk Road, his version of it. Not Marco Polo's, not the imperial courier. Just the world as it exists in this man's personal economy. The places where he is welcome, the places where he must wait, the places where the fruit is best, the salt is cheapest, and the local clerk overcharges if his wife is present. This map won't survive in any museum. But it's how the real trade works. Reckoning in the dark. He adds an entry to today's page. Stopped at river camp, inventory intact, weather dry, tea merchant owes still, trust unchanged. Then slowly he closes the ledger, wraps it in oilcloth, places it back beneath the blanket inside the chest, not locked, not hidden, just tucked away from the wind. He lets out a long breath, not from fatigue but from completion. The day has been recorded. Its facts will not fade. He leans back on his mat, folds his hands and watches the stars. You sit beside him, the fire almost out. And you think, this is not the stuff of legend. No emperors, no battles, no famous last words. Just a man, a book, and a few lines of memory. But then again, isn't that what holds most of history together? Dawn arrives with silence. There are no bells, no drums, only the pale blue flush of sky, the crackling sound of a single cookfire being coaxed back to life, and the rhythmic clinking of harnesses as the caravan slowly prepares to move. The dust hasn't started rising yet. It's a peaceful moment, the world before motion. The Sogdian trader is already awake. He's kneeling beside his chest, tightening the straps. The ledger has been packed, the coin pouch tied securely to his sash. His face is as unreadable as ever, calm, a little weathered, not especially cheerful or solemn. He does this every day. Today, though, something unexpected is about to happen. A rider appears from the south, alone, dusty. His robe is faded, the trim frayed. Not a threat, he carries no visible weapon, but he rides with purpose. He dismounts near the edge of camp and walks directly toward the merchant. No words are exchanged. Not at first. They sit cross-legged near a low stone, out of earshot of the others. The rider unwraps a tightly bound parcel from beneath his cloak. It is small, cloth-wrapped, marked with a faint red stain. He opens it just enough for the merchant to see the contents. Inside, a string of uncut gemstones, dull at first glance but real. Spinels, garnets, perhaps a few river rubies, not imperial grade, but valuable. The merchant raises an eyebrow, then reaches into his satchel, not for silver, not for bolts of cloth. For a ledger page. A deal made in writing and dust. This page is not from the main ledger. It is a single, folded scrap, written in darker ink. A contract of sorts, short, written in Sogdian script, with numbers, weight estimates, a place name, and a date. It appears that the merchant agreed, long ago, to supply 7 bolts of plain silk to someone at the western edge of the Pamir Mountains. But the man who was supposed to deliver it died. The record had been buried in the back of the ledger. Until now. The writer holds out the page. The merchant nods, of course. A debt remembered, a delivery interrupted. Now the delivery is being claimed much later than expected. The gems are payment. The merchant does not question why it's late. He doesn't ask if the buyer is still alive. He simply accepts. He reaches into his pack and removes a sealed bundle wrapped in oiled felt. Inside, silk, unremarkable but clean, tightly rolled without flaw. He counts 7 bolts, dusts the edges, hands them to the rider. No receipt is given, no witness is called. But the transaction is done. And you realize this was never about the cloth. This was about integrity. A deal remembered, a promise honored, even when half the people involved are likely gone. Commerce as memory. This is the part of trading no one writes about. Not the bazaars, not the spices, not the jewels. But the quiet decisions made when no one is watching. The quiet, often boring discipline of men who remember the exact weight of a promise made 15 years ago under a different sun. The rider says nothing as he leaves. He ties the silk to his saddle and rides off at a slow, deliberate pace northwest, toward the mountains. The merchant watches until the man is a speck in the grass. Then he reaches for his wax tablet. He writes, "Debt resolved, 7 bolts delivered, rider wore red-stained cord, stones accepted, ledger to be amended." He closes the tablet and says nothing more. The road ahead. By midday, the caravan is on the move again. Camels groan, hooves clop, the sun climbs high. The trader walks alongside his pack animals, his robe flapping slightly in the wind. He is not rich, he is not famous, but he is trusted. Every market he enters, people nod. Not because he speaks loudly, but because he shows up, pays on time, keeps promises, writes everything down. And somehow that has been enough. As the wind rises again across the open plains, scattering dust and threadbare leaves, you walk beside him and think, this man will not be remembered in history books. There will be no statue, no poem, but the silk he carried may still be part of someone's wedding robe. The gems he accepted may be sewn into the crown of a tribal chief. The page he signed may survive in a sealed jar, buried under layers of sand. And so you ask yourself, if the road forgets your name but remembers your honesty, is that enough? Story 7. Button debates and stitch schedules in late medieval Paris. Before the street hawkers shout, before the bells of Notre Dame echo through the early mist, and long before any noble throws open their shutters, a candle flickers in the back room of a small stone shop on Rue de la Ferronnerie. Inside, the tailor is already at work. He's not measuring a nobleman or stitching a doublet. Not yet. Instead, he is bent over a table full of buttons, wooden, horn, brass, cloth-covered, bone, counting them one by one into neat piles. A pot of barley water steams on the fire. His assistant still sleeps in the loft above, snoring faintly. You are standing beside the table, watching the city outside the shuttered window turn from blue to gray. There's no drama here, only precision. Because in late 14th century Paris, tailoring isn't an art form. It's a schedule, a ledger, a long series of debates over things as small as stitches and as divisive as buttons. A matter of class and thread. The tailor's hands are calloused, but his nails are clean. His linen apron is smudged with chalk. He has 5 clients this week, 2 merchants, a visiting cleric, the baker's sister on credit, and most importantly, a minor noble's second son in need of a ceremonial cloak with silver buttonwork. That's why the tailor is counting now. The cloak must have exactly 40 buttons, no more, no less. The contract specifies it, but the boy's father, sour-faced and perpetually late to fittings, insists on horn, not bone, and no brass nonsense. The tailor sighs. The horn buttons he has are uneven. The bone ones are better quality. He opens his notebook, a sheaf of parchment tied with thread, and makes a mark under button inventory. Horn 28 good, 12 thin, bone 19 matched, brass enough for market cloak. The decision will wait. For now the light grows stronger. The assistant stirs. The day begins. Paris wakes to fashion. Outside, the city breathes into life. Vendors open their carts. Apprentices scurry through alleys, clutching bread and bolts of wool. A cat walks the ridgepole of a nearby roof, unimpressed by the comings and goings below. The tailor opens the shutters. The street is narrow but busy: horses, carts, children chasing each other with smoothed sticks. The baker shouts something rude at the farrier. A student from the university passes by, nose buried in a scroll. The smell of yeast and river fog drifts in. You might not think of late medieval Paris as a center of fashion, but already there are arguments over sleeve width, cuff shape, and button placement. Guilds are forming. Tailoring is not just a job, it's a hierarchy. The tailor belongs to the fraternity of needle workers, a guild newly chartered and filled with men who spend half their time sewing and the other half debating whether spiral stitching counts as edge binding or if it's just showing off. They argue politely, usually. The tailor pulls out a piece of coarse wool from the workbench and marks it with chalk, a test swatch for the cleric's robe. The fabric is thick, dyed with walnut husk and soot. The cleric will want it simple, but still dignified. The button debate continued. Just before the sun reaches the far window, a knock comes at the door. The assistant answers. It is the button supplier's apprentice Henry, a boy with ink stains on his sleeves and the personality of a wet broom. He brings a small sack tied with waxed twine. Inside, new horn buttons, freshly turned on a lathe near the tannery. "They're from Burgundy," Henry mutters, "not our usual turner." The tailor inspects one. It's smooth, dense, not bad. He lays it beside a Parisian-made bone button. You watch as he turns both in his fingers, considering. Bone is cleaner, but horn matches the cloak fabric better. Bone has better grain, but horn is slightly cheaper. Bone shows wealth. Horn shows restraint. He asks the assistant, who shrugs. It's for the noble's son, the tailor murmurs. Not for the noble. Decision made. Horn. He counts out 41 one extra, just in case, and marks the remaining as inventory. Then he lights a second candle. The stitching begins. A world built in stitches. Each stitch is counted. Not because the client demands it, but because time is measured in thread. Each inch sewn equals 4 minutes. Each hour is 4 lengths of hem, or 2 sleeves if you skip breaks. The tailor's wife once teased that he loved his stitch schedule more than he loved his own sons. He didn't disagree. The assistant begins pressing creases into a merchant's outer tunic, wool, blue, dyed with woad. 2 buttons on the collar, none on the cuffs. The merchant requested extra space in the chest for breathing after meat pies. The tailor added a discreet dart at the waist. No charge. Because the best tailors don't just follow measurements, they interpret them. The boy upstairs begins sweeping. The day rolls on. Orders shift, thread knots, chalk dust thickens. By mid-afternoon, the shop is full of fabric, snippets of overheard street noise, and one very worn oilcloth folder with a list of stitch schedules arranged like a war plan. And still the tailor sits quiet, focused, pulling horn buttons through wax thread, one by one. The city may be filled with scholars and merchants and priests, but this tiny room holds its own kind of power. Because here, with cloth and chalk and patience, the social order is made visible. And you may ask yourself, when all the robes have frayed and every button has been lost, who stitched the difference between a noble and a clerk? It is late morning now, and the tailor's shop is thick with fabric and decisions. The nobleman's son has not arrived for his fitting. The merchant's tunic hangs unfinished on the back wall. A folded note left by the baker's sister is pinned to the lintel with a bone needle. Will come Thursday. Add lining if time. Merci. And beneath it all, as steady as the stitching, is the day's real pressure, not from noble requests or fabric shortages, but from the guild. Today, the tailor must attend the monthly meeting of the Fraternity of Needle Workers. He sighs quietly. He would rather sew. You follow him as he dusts his sleeves, sets aside his thimble, and ties the ledger closed. His assistant takes over the cloak stitching. The noble boy still hasn't arrived, but that's expected. Noble sons are rarely on time. The tailor slips his best wool coat over his shoulders, modest, well pressed, with only 2 visible buttons, and heads out into the crooked, sunlit maze of medieval Paris. The guild that threads the city. The fraternity meets in a modest hall behind a spice merchant's house in the Latin Quarter. It smells faintly of pepper and damp parchment. The room is small, lit by oiled horn windows, with benches pushed close together and a narrow table at the front where the guild scribe waits, stylus in hand. There are maybe 30 tailors in attendance. Some are old, hunched, their fingertips stained with dye. Others are young, ambitious, with too bright cuffs and complaints about taxes. They nod to the tailor as he arrives. He nods back. He is neither high-ranking nor obscure. He is simply reliable. The meeting begins with a reading of stitch quotas and the enforcement of button placement regulations. You might think that's a joke, but it's not. A recent complaint claims a younger tailor has been placing buttons too closely together, on gentlemen's sleeves, an extravagance the guild forbids unless the customer is titled. The argument is civil but pointed. One master tailor leans forward and mutters, 4 buttons on a sleeve. What's next? 5. Shall we add embroidery to coal sacks too? Laughter, but under it real tension. In a city where clothing defines status, even the spacing of buttons becomes political. The guild must uphold the boundaries. It's not just about tailoring, it's about order. And so, the scribe adds a ruling to the day's notes. 4 sleeve buttons permitted only for titled clients, others 3 evenly spaced. The tailor, quiet as always, makes a mental note. Tomorrow, he'll adjust the merchant's tunic. The ledger of offenses. After the ruling, the guild's complaint ledger is opened. The tailor watches, expression unreadable. Complaints are read aloud. One apprentice found selling leftover wool scraps to students fined 2 sous. A journeyman accused of falsifying cloth weighed on a widow's dress denied, but watched. One tailor absent from his stall 3 days, without cause expelled for a season. It is not dramatic, just methodical. And yet it matters. Because without this dull but detailed oversight, Paris tailors would be trampled beneath the shoemakers, overshadowed by the glovemakers, forgotten by the robe merchants. The guild keeps them legitimate. It defends their right to measure the elite, even if that means endless debates over button size. The tailor speaks briefly. Near the end of the meeting, the tailor finally raises a hand. A new silk dye has appeared in the market, plum-colored, imported from Genoa. He asks whether using it on morning gowns is permitted, since it reads black in low light but not in full sun. The room murmurs. It's a good question. One elder clears his throat and says, "If a widow's dress gleams purple at her husband's funeral, it will be our guild that's blamed, not the dyer." Another counters, "But the cost is lower and the color lasts." The scribe records it for future judgment. For now, plum dye is acceptable, but only for sleeves, not hems or full gowns. The tailor nods once, that's enough. He rises quietly, steps outside into the gray light and begins walking home. The sky has turned. The smell of rain is faint on the wind. It's nearly time to choose the thread for the cleric's robe. Guild loyalty and the price of thread. As he walks, the tailor thinks briefly of his father who stitched breeches for stablemen and never belonged to a guild. The work was fast, unregulated, underpaid. Buyers haggled. Fabric was reused. Joining the guild was a quiet vow. You would sew by the book. You would price fairly. You would protect the craft. No matter how dull that became. The tailor doesn't resent it. He just respects it. At his shop, the assistant has pinned the cloak's shoulders and begun the hem. The noble boy has arrived at last, sulking and loud, but fit to measure. The tailor washes his hands, selects his finest needle. And you ask yourself, if a button is placed precisely, but no one notices, did the tailor succeed or fail? The final candle burns low in the shop. Outside, the lanes of Paris are quiet. Even the taverns have gone still. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimes. 11 strokes. A thin mist clings to the stones of Rue de la Ferronnerie, and a stray dog sniffs at an overturned cart near the tannery. Inside, the tailor finishes the last stitch on the nobleman's cloak. Not a dramatic stitch, not a flourish. Just one small, practiced motion, a pull, a knot, and a snip. The silver-gray thread disappears against the horn button loop, leaving no trace of effort. That's the point. You sit across from him, as he leans back with a quiet sigh. This cloak will be worn tomorrow at a ceremonial gathering. The nobleman's second son will stand near a dais, perhaps 30 feet from a bishop, perhaps not even noticed, but he will be dressed correctly. And no one, not the bishop, not the father, not the son himself, will think for even a moment about who placed the buttons. But they will expect them to be there, spaced evenly, matching the lining, aligned with the hem. This is how the tailor knows he has done well. When no one notices. Measuring quiet triumphs. He takes a moment to examine the piece, holds it up in the candlelight, turns it, checks the stitching on the back, the lay of the hem, the fall of the shoulders. He smooths one sleeve with the side of his hand, adjusts a tiny wrinkle in the underarm. There is no fanfare, no client watching in admiration, only the rustle of wool and the slow melting of wax. He sets the cloak aside, folds it carefully, wraps it in linen. Then he opens his stitch schedule. Not a book, just a folded parchment, each day divided by project. He marks today's entry with a slash. Ceremonial cloak done, 6.5 hours, 40 horn buttons, loop thread reinforced. Beneath it, another note. Cleric's robe begin tomorrow, adjust collar for low-set neck. He stretches his hands, rubs his thumb, worn from the day's work. No applause, just a line drawn across a task. And tomorrow, another. A life without a label. Tailors don't sign their work. There are no maker's marks, no initials hidden in hems. The cloak will be worn, perhaps mended, eventually passed down or lost. In time it will fray, the buttons may be replaced, the lining might be patched. At some point it will stop fitting anyone. It will become rags or lining for something else. But for a while it will serve. And while it serves, no one will know the name of the man who measured it, stitched it, adjusted it after the noble boy stood lopsided on the measuring stool. No one will remember the guild vote on sleeve buttons. No one will recall the debate over plum dye. And still there will be a shape in the world that fits someone, because this tailor once sat beneath a candle and got it right. The apprentice and the thread. The assistant, half asleep by the fire, stirs. The tailor lets him sleep. He wipes his needle, slides it into its leather roll, and places it beside the parchment on the shelf. Tomorrow, he'll show the boy how to reinforce collars for clerics with forward-sloping shoulders. It will take longer than it should. The boy will get it wrong. Twice. And that, too, is part of the craft. Not speed. Repetition. Measured mistakes, patience in wool. The tailor pulls the shutter closed. The street lamp outside has burned out. He moves through the shop slowly, blowing out the last candle, folding the benches, placing the button sack back in its drawer. He does not pause for pride. He does not expect thanks. He only places a finger to the list pinned to the lintel and crosses off the day's work with a charcoal mark. Then turns in for the night. A thought that lingers. Outside, the stars are out dim over the haze of chimneys and the wide, sloping roofs of late medieval Paris. Inside, the cloak waits in silence. And you ask yourself, if history remembers the robe but not the hands that stitched it, who do we really owe?